Melania didn't know the microphone was still on. She thought her words would vanish into the air like they always had, carefully whispered, shielded behind polite smiles and flawless posture. But that morning, in a packed congressional chamber, she leaned toward the aide beside her, lowered her voice just enough to feel safe, and said the one thing she could never take back. Women like her will never be real Americans. For a moment, nobody reacted. The sentence hung there, brittle and cold, as if the walls themselves were deciding whether to echo it. Then a sharp crackle came from the speakers overhead. Every journalist, every staffer, every representative in that high-ceilinged hearing room heard it, live, unedited, undeniable. Jasmine Crockett felt something shift in the center of her chest. Not rage yet, just that hollow recognition of a line being crossed. Of a mask finally slipping. She didn't move, didn't turn her head. Her gaze stayed fixed on her own folded hands, as if the smallest gesture might shatter the last pretense of civility. Across the dais, a cameraman slowly adjusted his focus. The red tally light blinked on, capturing Jasmine's stillness, Melania's frozen profile, and the stunned faces of everyone who understood that no apology was going to erase what had just happened. And as the seconds dragged out, the world outside began to listen. Reporters in the back row stared at each other, their hands hovering over keyboards. A producer mouthed to her assistant, "Did she really say that?" But no one dared speak it aloud. Not yet. Jasmine finally lifted her head. Her eyes met Melania's across the expanse of polished wood, and for a second, there was nothing between them except raw, unfiltered truth. The kind of truth you can't spin, can't walk back. The kind that exposes you in front of millions. Melania tried to recover. She tucked a strand of immaculate hair behind her ear, forced her mouth into something resembling a polite smile. But her hands were trembling where they clutched the briefing folder. She looked down, pretending to read. The performance was over, and she knew it. Congresswoman Crockett, the committee chair said, voice strained, "You have the floor." The whole room seemed to brace for impact. Jasmine didn't look at her notes. She didn't clear her throat or stall for time. She simply folded her hands on the table, her voice low and steady. "I wasn't going to speak on this today," she began, "but since we're all pretending to be honest now, let's not pretend I didn't hear exactly what you said." Someone near the cameras let out a breath they hadn't realized they were holding. Outside the chamber, social media had already erupted. Clips of Melania's words were looping across feeds, subtitled, slowed down, dissected. Millions were watching, waiting to see if Jasmine Crockett would do what so many before her had been too tired, too cornered, too alone to do. Answer back. And she was about to. Jasmine didn't blink. She didn't look away, not even when Melania shifted in her chair like she might stand up and walk out. The silence was electric, thick enough to feel in your lungs. "You've spent years," Jasmine continued, voice still so calm it made the words sharper, "telling people like me how to behave. How to prove we belong here. How to moderate our tone so you don't feel uncomfortable." Melania tried to interject, but Jasmine raised a hand, just enough to hold the floor without ever raising her voice. "But here's the thing," she said, leaning in slightly. "It's not my job to make you comfortable. And it's not your place to question my citizenship or my humanity because you think a microphone isn't listening." Melania's lips parted, but no words came. The camera zoomed in on her face, the carefully curated composure splintering into something rawer, something real. A junior staffer in the corner swallowed hard. They were young, just out of college, still naive enough to think that in politics, lines like this didn't get crossed in broad daylight. "Do you know what happens when you call someone less American in front of the country?" Jasmine asked. She didn't wait for an answer. "You remind every person who looks like me that no matter how hard we work, how carefully we follow the rules, some people will never see us as equals." For a heartbeat, the only sound was the steady hum of the cameras recording every breath. Jasmine inhaled slowly, her gaze steady. "But I'm not here to win your approval," she said. "I'm here to make sure you never forget that we belong here whether you admit it or not." And somewhere, a million screens flickered as viewers leaned closer, because they knew this wasn't over. Melania's fingers fumbled with her papers, searching for a script that wasn't there. The briefing notes she'd rehearsed all morning suddenly looked meaningless. No talking point could soften the reality of what she'd just been caught saying. Jasmine let the moment hang. She knew the power of a pause, the way it forces everyone to sit with the truth. Her father used to tell her that silence can be more dangerous than any shout, because it leaves no room to pretend you didn't hear. Outside the chamber doors, reporters clustered around monitors, watching the feed with the kind of rapt attention usually reserved for verdicts and resignations. A few whispered to each other about whether this was going to end someone's career. Inside, Jasmine kept her gaze locked on Melania. "You want to talk about what makes someone American?" she asked, her voice low but unflinching. "It's not the accent in their voice. It's not the neighborhood they come from. And it sure as hell isn't the color of their skin." Melania's eyes darted to the committee chair, silently pleading for intervention. But the chair didn't move, didn't speak. No one was going to save her from this. Respectfully, Jasmine continued, "You don't get to question my patriotism while you hide your prejudice behind closed doors." Someone in the back coughed, breaking the tension for half a second, but only half. Jasmine folded her hands again, her shoulders steady. "Because the truth," she said, her tone like glass cutting through the air, "is that I don't have to prove I belong here. Not to you. Not to anyone." She paused, scanning the room, every camera, every witness, every person who'd ever wondered whether they were allowed to claim space that was theirs by right. "And after today," she said, "no one watching will ever forget that." Somewhere in the chamber, a phone chimed, a breaking news alert that Melania's comment was already trending worldwide. #Melania Exposed was climbing into the top 5 before the committee session was even halfway over. But Jasmine didn't care about hashtags. She cared about the millions of people watching, some nodding in recognition, others squirming in discomfort. All of them seeing the truth laid bare without apology. Melania finally found her voice, though it sounded smaller than it ever had. "That's not what I meant," she stammered, her hand flattening the papers on the table. "You misunderstood." "No," Jasmine cut in, her tone precise. "I didn't misunderstand. You were clear." A hush swept over the room. Even the most cynical staffers, the ones who had seen 100 congressional hearings dissolve into empty sparring, sensed this wasn't a performance. It was something heavier. "You think people like me are only here because someone let us in," Jasmine continued. "You think our belonging is conditional, something that can be revoked if we step out of line." Melania's eyes darted toward the cameras, as if she could will them to shut off, to stop recording her worst moment. But they kept rolling. "And maybe you thought you were safe saying it," Jasmine said. "That your status, your privilege, your last name would protect you from the consequences." She leaned forward, voice dropping to almost a whisper. "But it didn't. And it won't." The words hit with the quiet finality of a gavel strike. A junior reporter near the doorway scribbled a note, "This is history." And for a breathless moment, the whole country seemed to be watching, waiting to see if Melania would respond or simply fold under the weight of her own words. Melania swallowed hard, her lips pressing into a thin, colorless line. She looked like she wanted to vanish into the mahogany paneling behind her, to pretend she hadn't been the author of her own unraveling. But Jasmine didn't give her that out. "I grew up in a house where we were taught that respect isn't something you demand, it's something you show," she said, her voice steady. "And you just showed every person in this country exactly how little respect you have for people who don't look like you." The words didn't echo. They didn't need to. Their impact was in the way Melania's shoulders curled inward, in the way the aides shifted uncomfortably behind her, suddenly aware that no prepared statement would erase this. "You want to know what makes someone American?" Jasmine asked, her gaze fixed and unblinking. It's not the country stamped on their birth certificate. It's not how they pronounce their vowels. It's the courage to stand up when something is wrong, and the decency to admit it. Melania inhaled shakily, but said nothing. And here's the part you won't say out loud, Jasmine continued, her tone softening, not with sympathy but with something closer to pity. You thought you could say that about me because for too long, people in rooms like this didn't call it what it was. She lifted her chin, voice rising just enough to reach every corner of the chamber. But I'm not afraid to call it by its name. A hush fell over the room. It was racism. And if you're going to wear it, at least have the honesty to stop pretending it's anything else. No one interrupted. No one dared. Outside the chamber, thousands of notifications pinged and buzzed on screens around the world. And inside, for the first time since the hearing began, Melania didn't look composed. She looked exposed. For a moment, no one moved. It felt like the entire room was holding its breath, waiting to see if Melania would try to salvage her dignity or simply slip into silence. But Jasmine wasn't finished. She rested her hands on the polished table, the reflection of the overhead lights glinting across her knuckles. When she spoke again, her voice was quieter, more intimate, but somehow even harder to look away from. Do you know what it feels like to be told you don't belong in your own country? She asked. To walk into rooms like this and know before you open your mouth that some people have already decided you're unworthy? Melania looked down, her eyes fixed on the floor. She didn't offer an answer. I do, Jasmine said. And so do millions of people watching this right now. She paused, letting that truth settle in the air. But here's what you need to understand, our belonging doesn't come from your permission. It doesn't depend on whether you approve of our names, our skin, our stories. We are here because we earned the right to be here. She shifted her gaze to the cameras, as if she were speaking to every living room, every break room, every kitchen table where someone was watching and remembering the first time they'd been made to feel small. And we're not leaving. In the back of the chamber, a staffer wiped their eyes, pretending it was just the glare of the overhead lights. Melania lifted her head as if to speak, but the words faltered before they reached her lips. Whatever she'd planned to say had already been swallowed by the moment. Jasmine leaned back in her chair, her expression calm, resolute. Say whatever you want about me, she said. But don't expect me to stay silent when you show the world who you really are. And in that instant, everyone understood, this wasn't a political skirmish. It was a reckoning. The committee chair cleared his throat, the sound brittle in the heavy quiet. Mrs. Trump, he said carefully, would you like to respond before we move on? Melania's mouth opened. Closed. For once, the scripts and practiced lines were nowhere to be found. She glanced to her right, searching the faces of her aides for a lifeline. None came. I didn't mean it that way, she finally managed, her voice thinner than anyone had ever heard it. I was frustrated. It was taken out of context. Jasmine didn't look impressed. That's the problem, she said softly, and somehow that softness was sharper than any accusation. It's always taken out of context. It's always an excuse. Melania shifted, her hands twisting together in her lap. You can spend years smiling in front of cameras, Jasmine continued, her voice rising just enough to fill the room, saying the right words about inclusion and unity. But the second you think no one is listening, the truth comes out. A few heads nodded, small, reluctant acknowledgments from people who hadn't planned on agreeing with her but couldn't deny what they'd heard. The truth, Jasmine said, is that you don't see people like me as equals. You never did. Melania's gaze darted to the chairman, but he looked away. And maybe you'd rather believe your words don't matter, Jasmine went on, her tone unflinching, but they do. Because every young person watching this hearing, every kid who's been told they're less American, just learned they were right to trust their instincts. That no amount of politeness will protect them from someone who thinks they're inferior. Melania exhaled shakily, her shoulders slumping under the weight of the cameras, the silence, the truth. Jasmine folded her hands again, her voice suddenly calm. "And I'm not here to accept your apology," she said. "Because I don't need it." For the first time all morning, Melania looked like she finally understood she couldn't escape what she'd done. No one moved. Even the aides with their polished shoes and rigid posture seemed to sense that they were witnessing something they'd be telling stories about for the rest of their careers. Jasmine's voice was almost gentle now, but it carried a finality that made the whole room feel smaller. "I don't need your apology," she repeated, her gaze steady on Melania's pale face. "Because I didn't come here to be validated by you. I came here to remind every person watching that we don't have to shrink ourselves to fit your comfort." Melania's fingers tightened around the edge of the table. Her mouth trembled. "You called me less American," Jasmine continued. "But the truth is, people like me have spent generations proving our loyalty to a country that didn't always love us back. We've built it, defended it, bled for it. And still, we get told to be grateful for a seat at the table." A woman in the press gallery closed her eyes, as if trying to swallow the ache rising in her chest. Jasmine shifted her focus to the cameras, speaking to everyone who had ever been made to feel unwelcome in their own home. "We don't owe you gratitude for the right to exist," she said. "We don't owe you silence so you can pretend you're better than us." Melania tried to look composed, but the effort cracked around the edges. The practiced elegance slipped into something closer to desperation. "Because here's the part you can't spin away," Jasmine said. "Your words didn't expose me. They exposed you." The committee chair didn't interrupt. The reporters didn't move. It was the kind of moment that felt too important to break. And then, with the cameras locked on her, Jasmine said the words that would become the headline across every network. "You can pretend this was a misunderstanding. But the rest of us heard you clearly. And we won't forget." A hush settled over the chamber, an almost sacred quiet that didn't feel like victory or defeat but something deeper, more permanent. The sound of one truth landing where 1,000 polite lies had lived. Melania didn't try to answer again. There was nothing left to spin, no place to hide. Even the most practiced smile couldn't cover the raw, unvarnished reality that she'd finally said out loud what too many had always suspected. Jasmine didn't look at her anymore. She turned her gaze to the room itself, the walls lined with portraits of men who had never imagined a woman like her standing here, refusing to bow. She took a slow breath, her voice clear and sure. "To everyone watching," she said, "know this, your worth is not determined by the smallness of someone else's heart." A murmur rippled through the gallery. Reporters lifted their cameras higher, sensing they were capturing a moment that would replay for years. "You don't have to prove your belonging to people who will never see you," Jasmine continued. "You don't have to earn your humanity by being quiet while someone tries to strip it away." Melania closed her eyes, her shoulders sagging under the weight of it all. Jasmine stood, her chair sliding back with a low scrape. She gathered her notes, though she hadn't needed them, and smoothed the edge of her blazer with the deliberate calm of someone who knew exactly who she was. "Today wasn't about me," she said. "It was about every person who's ever been told they were too different, too loud, too other to belong." She paused, looking into the cameras one last time. "We belong. And no microphone will ever change that." With that, she stepped away from the table, her heels echoing across the marble floor. And in living rooms across the country, in classrooms, in offices, in the quiet of someone's car parked on a lunch break, people watched her go, feeling something they hadn't felt in a long time. Seen. And maybe that's the lesson this moment leaves behind. That no matter how polished someone's image, no matter how carefully they rehearse their smiles and sound bites, the truth finds its way to the surface. It always does. Today wasn't just about one remark caught on a live microphone. It wasn't just about Jasmine Crockett and Melania Trump sitting across from each other, locked in a quiet, relentless reckoning. It was about everyone who's ever been told they didn't belong. About everyone who's ever had to swallow their anger to keep a job, keep the peace, keep their dignity intact. It was about the power of refusing to shrink. The power of standing up, even when your voice shakes. The power of saying, "I'm not going anywhere, and I don't need your permission to exist." Because in the end, that's how change begins. Not with shouting matches or perfectly crafted apologies, but with the simple, unstoppable act of telling the truth when it costs you something. If this story made you feel seen, if it reminded you of your own worth, or if it lit a fire you thought had gone out, hold on to that. And never, ever let anyone tell you that you are less again. Thank you for watching, and for believing that every story deserves to be heard.